The Prodigies of the Blessed Virgin Mary, Series 14, Volume 20, October 22nd, 1926. The Virgin, while she made no miracle, made the great miracle of giving a God to creatures. The Sovereign Queen, my mamma, when I had to prepare the kingdom of redemption, I drew her so close to myself, I kept her so occupied in her interior, as to be able to form together with her the miracle of redemption, for which there was such great need. There were so many things which together we were to do, to redo, to complete, that I had to hide from her outward appearance anything which might be called miracle, except for her perfect virtue. By this I rendered her more free, so as to let her cross the endless sea of the eternal Fiat, that she might have access to the divine majesty, in order to obtain the kingdom of redemption. What would be greater, that the celestial queen had given sight to the blind and speech to the mute, and so forth, or the miracle of making the eternal Word descend upon earth? The first would have been accidental, passing, and individual miracles. The second, instead, is a permanent miracle, and it is for everyone, as long as they want it. Therefore the first would have been as though nothing compared to the second. She was the true Sun, who, eclipsing everything, eclipsed the very word of the Father within herself, letting all the goods, all the effects and miracles which redemption produced, germinate from her light. But as Sun, she produced goods and miracles without letting herself be seen or pointed at as the primary cause of everything. In fact, all the good I did upon earth, I did because the Empress of Heaven reached the point of holding her empire in the divinity, and by her empire she drew me from heaven to give me to creatures. Volume 20, November 4th, 1926. How the Most Holy Virgin was the faithful copy of her Creator and of all creation. I was in my continuous state in the Supreme Will, praying my Queen Mamma to help me to impetrate this kingdom of the eternal Fiat, and my sweet Jesus moving in my interior told me, my daughter, the most perfect copy of the children of the kingdom of my will, was my celestial Mamma, and because it had its first daughter in it, redemption could come. Otherwise, had we not had the first daughter of our will, I, the eternal Word, would never have descended from heaven. In order to descend upon earth, I would never have made use of, nor trusted, children who were extraneous to our will. So you see, a daughter of our will was needed for the coming of the kingdom of redemption. And because she was daughter of the kingdom of the eternal Fiat, she was the faithful copy of her Creator, and the perfect copy of all creation. She was to enclose all the acts that the Supreme Will exercises in all created things, and because she had supremacy and sovereignty over all creation, she was to enclose within herself the heavens, the stars, the sun, and everything, so that the copy of the heavens, of the sun, of the sea, and also of the earth, all flowery, might be found in her sovereignty. So in looking at my mamma, one could see in her portents never before seen. One could see heavens. One could see most refulgent sun. One could see crystal clear sea, in which we reflected ourselves in order to see our daughter. One could see earth at springtime, always flowery, which attracted the celestial Maker to take his strolls on it. Oh, how beautiful was the celestial sovereign, as we saw in her not only our copy, but all of our works enclosed in her. And this, because she enclosed our will within herself. Volume 20, December 10th, 1926. How the divine will is a continued act which never ceases. How the Virgin let herself be dominated by this act, and formed its life within herself. How in heaven, in the feasts of the Virgin, they celebrate the divine will. My poor mind was swimming in the unending sea of the eternal volition, and my adorable Jesus showed, as the greatest prodigy, how his most holy will, while being so immense, would restrict itself within the creature, though remaining immense, in order to dominate her and form its life in her. The creature who would remain immersed under a continued act of this divine will was the miracle of miracles, and the prodigy never before seen. And lovable Jesus, all goodness, told me, "Dearest daughter of my will, you must know that only my volition possesses a continued act that never ceases. This act is full of life, and therefore it gives life to everything. It preserves everything, and it maintains balance within itself and in all things. It alone can boast about possessing this continuous act of always giving life, of loving always, always, without ceasing for one instant. My humanity itself, if it possesses this continued act, it is because in it flowed this continued act of the supreme Fiat. How long did the life of my humanity last upon earth? It was extremely brief. As soon as I fulfilled what was necessary for the redemption, I departed for my celestial fatherland, though my acts remained. But these remained because they were animated by the continued act of my will. On the other hand, my will never departs. It is always at its place, pre-existing, without ever interrupting its act of life over everything that came out of it. Oh, if my will departed from earth and from all created things, all things would lose their life and would resolve into nothing. Because my will created all things from nothing, if it withdrew, they would all lose their existence. Now, do you want to know who is the one who let herself be dominated by this continuous act of my supreme will, and never giving life to her own, received this continuous act of life of divine will, in such a way as to form within herself a life fully divine, and in the likeness of her Creator? It was the celestial and sovereign Queen. From the very first instant of her immaculate conception, she received this act of life of divine will, to then receive it continuously during all of her life. This was the greatest prodigy, the miracle never before seen, the life of the divine will in the Empress of Heaven. In fact, one single act of life of this Fiat can issue heavens, suns, seas, stars, and everything it wants. So all the human acts placed before a single act of life of this will of mine are like many drops of water that dissolve within the ocean, like tiny little flames before the sun, like atoms in the great space of the universe. Imagine yourself what the height of the Immaculate Queen possesses, with this life of continuous act of divine will formed in her. This was the true miracle, the prodigy never before seen, that the littleness of the celestial sovereign enclosed within herself a divine life, a will, immense and eternal, which possesses all possible and imaginable goods. Therefore, in all the feasts with which the Church honors my mamma, all heaven celebrates, glorifies, praises, and thanks the Supreme Will, because they see its life in her, the primary cause by which she obtained the longed-for Redeemer. And therefore, because this Fiat had life, which dominated and reigned in her, they find themselves in possession of the celestial Jerusalem. It was precisely the divine will that formed its life in this excelling creature, who opened heaven, which had been closed by the human will. Therefore, with justice, while they celebrate the Queen, they celebrate the supreme Fiat, which made her Queen, reigned in her, formed its life, and is the primary cause of their eternal happiness. So a creature who lets my will dominate and gives it free field in order to form its life in her is the greatest of prodigies. She can move heaven and earth, even God himself, as if she were doing nothing, while she does everything. And she alone can win the most important things, destroy all obstacles, face anything, because a divine will reigns in her. And just as all the power of the Fiat dwelling in the creature was needed in order to impetrate redemption, and my humanity, which possessed that power, was needed in order to form it, in the same way, in order to impetrate the coming of the kingdom of my Fiat itself, another creature is needed, who would let it dwell within herself, and give it free field, in order to form its life, so that my will itself, through her, may accomplish the one and most important prodigy, its coming to reign on earth as it does in heaven. And because this is the greatest thing which shall place divine balance in the human family, I do great things in you, Luisa. I centralize in you everything which it is necessary and decorous to know about this kingdom of mine, the great good it wants to give, the happiness of those who shall live in it, its long story, its long sorrow, and of many centuries, because while it wants to come to reign in the midst of creatures, to make them happy, they do not open the doors to it. They do not long for it. They do not invite it. And while it is present in their midst, they do not know it. Only a divine will could bear with such invincible patience being in their midst, giving them life, and being not even known. My will is great, endless, and infinite, and wherever it reigns it wants to do things worthy of its greatness, of its sanctity, and of the power it contains. Therefore be attentive, my daughter. This is not about just anything, or about forming a sanctity, but it is about forming a kingdom for my adorable and divine will. Volume 21, April 16, 1927. How our Lord made the deposit of his sacramental life in the heart of the Most Holy Virgin. The great good that a life animated by the divine will can do. How in her sorrows the Most Holy Virgin found the secret of her strength in the divine will. I was doing the hour in which Jesus instituted the Most Holy Eucharist, and Jesus, moving in my interior, told me, "My daughter, when I do an act, first I look to see whether there is at least one creature in whom to place the deposit of my act, so that she may take the good I do, and keep it safe and well defended." Now, when I instituted the Most Holy Sacrament, I looked for this creature, and my Queen Mamma offered herself to receive this act of mine, and the deposit of this great gift, saying to me, "My son, just as I offered you my womb, and my whole being in your conception, to keep you safe and defended, I now offer you my maternal heart in order to receive this great deposit, and I line up around your sacramental life my affections, my heartbeats, my love, my thoughts, all of myself, to keep you defended, surrounded by cortege, loved, protected. I myself take on the commitment to repay you for the great gift you are giving. Trust your mamma, and I shall take care of the defense of your sacramental life. And since you yourself have constituted me queen of all creation, I have the right to line up around you all the light of the sun as homage and adoration, the stars, the heavens, the sea, all the inhabitants of the air. I place everything around you to give you love and glory. Now, ensuring a place for myself in which to put this great deposit of my sacramental life, and trusting my mamma, who had given me all the proofs of her faithfulness, I instituted the most holy sacrament. She was the only worthy creature who could keep, defend, and protect my act. See then, when creatures receive me, I descend into them together with the acts of my inseparable mamma, and only because of this can I perpetuate my sacramental life. Therefore, whenever I want to do a great work worthy of me, it is necessary that I first choose one creature, first in order to have a place in which to put my gift, second, to be repaid for it. They do the same also in the natural order. If a farmer wants to sow a seed, he does not throw it in the middle of the street, but he goes in search of a little field. First he works it, he forms the furrow, and then he sows the seed in it. And to keep it safe, he covers it with earth, anxiously waiting for the harvest, in order to be repaid for his work and for the seed which he entrusted to the earth. Someone else wants to form a beautiful object. First he prepares the raw materials, the place in which to put it, and then he forms it. So I have done for you, Luisa. I chose you, I prepared you, and then I entrusted to you the great gift of the manifestations of my will. And just as I entrusted the destiny of my sacramental life to my beloved mother, in the same way I wanted to trust you, entrusting to you the destiny of the kingdom of my will. Then I continued to think about all that my beloved good had done and suffered during the course of his life. And he added, "My daughter, my life down here was extremely brief, and I spent most of it hidden. But even though it was so very brief, since my humanity was animated by a divine will, how many goods did I not do? The whole church takes from my life, drinking her fill at the font of my doctrine. Each word of mine is a fountain placed at the mouth of each Christian. Each one of my examples is more than sun that illuminates, warms, fecundates, and makes the greatest sanctities mature. If one wanted to compare all the saints, all the good, all of their pains and their heroism placed before my very brief life, they would always be tiny little flames before the great sun. And since the divine will reigned in me, all the pains, the humiliations, confusions, contrasts, accusations that the enemies gave me during the course of my life and of my passion, everything served to their own humiliation and to their own greater confusion. In fact, since a divine will was in me, it happened with me as with the sun, when the clouds, extending through the lower air, seemed to want to give affront to the sun by obscuring the surface of the earth, covering momentarily the vividness of the solar light. But the sun laughs at the clouds, because they cannot have perennial life in the air. Their life is fleeting. A small wind is enough to make them dissolve, while the sun, is always triumphant in its fullness of light that dominates and fills the whole earth. The same happened with me. Everything that my enemies did to me, and even my very death, were like many clouds that covered my humanity. But the sun of my divinity they could not touch, and as soon as the wind of the power of my divine will moved, the clouds dissolved, and more than sun I rose again, glorious and triumphant, leaving the enemies more humiliated than before. My daughter, in the soul in whom my will reigns with all its fullness, minutes of life are centuries, and centuries of fullness of all goods, while wherever it does not reign, centuries of life are only minutes of goods that they contain. And if the soul in whom my will reigns should suffer humiliations, contrasts, and pains, these are like clouds that the wind of the divine Fiat unloads over those who to their own humiliation have dared to touch the bearer of my eternal volition. After this I was thinking about the sorrow of my mamma, when sorrowful and pierced in her heart, she departed from Jesus, leaving him dead in the sepulchre. And I thought to myself, how can it be possible that she had so much strength as to be able to leave him? It is true that he was dead, but it was always the body of Jesus. How could her maternal love not consume her, rather than letting her take one step alone away from that extinguished body? Yet she left him. What heroism! What strength! But while I was thinking of this, my sweet Jesus moved in my interior and told me, "My daughter, do you want to know how my mamma had the strength to leave me? All the secret of her strength was in my will reigning in her. She lived of a will that was divine, not human, and therefore she contained the immeasurable strength. Even more, you must know that when my pierced mamma left me in the sepulchre, my will kept her immersed within two immense seas, one of sorrow, and another, more extensive, of joys and beatitudes. And while that of sorrow gave her all the martyrdoms, that of joy gave her all the contentments. Her beautiful soul followed me into limbo, and was present at the feast that all the patriarchs, the prophets, her father, her mother, and our dear Saint Joseph made for me. With my presence, limbo became paradise, and I could not do without letting the one who had been inseparable from me in my pains be present at this first feast of the creatures. And her joy was so great that she had the strength to depart from my body, withdrawing and waiting for the fulfillment of my resurrection as the fulfillment of redemption. Joy sustained her in sorrow, and sorrow sustained her in joy. To the one who possesses my will, neither strength, nor power, nor joy can be lacking. Rather, she has everything at her disposal. Do you, Luisa, not experience this within yourself when you are without me and you feel consumed? The light of the divine Fiat forms its sea. It makes you happy, and it gives you life. Volume 23, October 20th, 1927. How the divine will awaits its kingdom in order to communicate this new act as the fulfillment of its glory. Now, my inseparable mamma, who possesses this new continued act as her own life, which was communicated to her by my divine will, because she lived life in it, is the first, most refulgent sun, which my volition formed in her, and she occupies the first place of queen, and gladdens the whole celestial court, making her light, her joys, her beauty, be reflected in all the blessed. But she knows that she did not exhaust all the new and incessant acts that my divine will has established to give to creatures, because it is inexhaustible, and oh, how many more it has. And she awaits that more sons be formed from this, its new act of new beauties and of rare beauty. And as true mother, she wants to be surrounded by all these sons, that they may reflect themselves in one another and delight one another. And the whole celestial court may receive not only her own reflections, but those of all these sons, as the fulfillment for all of the glory of the work of the creation of her Creator. As Queen, she awaits with great love the properties of my will in the creatures, which are as though her own, for she was the first to form the kingdom of my divine will within herself. Suppose that instead of one sun, more sons were formed in the vault of the heavens, new in beauty and in light. Would the vault of the heavens not appear as more beautiful and more adorned? It certainly would. And would these sons not reflect themselves as light in one another? And would all the inhabitants of the earth not receive the reflections, the goods, of all these sons? So it shall be in heaven. More so, since those who have possessed the kingdom of the supreme Fiat on earth shall have endless goods in common, because one is the will that has dominated them. This is why, even though in heaven there is the sovereign empress who possesses the fullness of the life of my divine volition, our glory on the part of creation is not complete. First, because our will is not known among creatures, and therefore it is neither loved nor longed for. Second, because not being known, it cannot give what it has established to give, and therefore it cannot form the many rarities of works that it knows how to do and can do. While once a work is complete, one sings victory and glory. Volume 23, January 13th, 1928. How God centralized everything in man in creating him, and how in the history of creation he now comes back to storm it, and centralizes the first act of creation in one creature from their stock to form the kingdom of his will. Now this love of ours was broken by man, and by withdrawing from our divine will, he himself removed from himself the imprint of royalty and the insignia of king. However, on our part nothing changed, and we persisted in our will of making of the work of our hands the Son King, not servant. And therefore, in the whole history of creation, we now come back to storm it, and to the fulfillment of our will, and we call one from their stock. And putting everyone aside, as if no one else existed, we renew the solemnity of the creation of the first man. The ardor of our love forms huge waves, and makes us see everything as love. And placing this creature in the midst of these waves, even though our all-seeingness sees everything, we put everything aside, and with this one we renew the great prodigy of the first act of creation. We did so with the sovereign queen, and since she did not break our love, and preserved the life of our will within herself, she has the title and the right of queen. Oh, how our love rejoices and makes feast in seeing in her the first queen of the work of our creative hands. But our love is not content with having only one queen, nor was this our will in creation, and therefore pouring itself out very strongly and releasing its contained waves, our love calls this creature and centralizes in her the whole work of creation. It pours upon her like pouring rain. It overflows with its divine qualities, in order to have the second daughter, queen, to make her form the foundations of the kingdom of our will, so as to be able to have the retinue of our children, all kings and queens. Volume 23, February 2nd, 1928. The reason why no one has spoken about the divine will until now. After this I was thinking about the unity of the divine Fiat, and was saying to myself, how could all those who have done good, so many great works, do them if they did not possess its unity? And Jesus, always benign, added, my daughter, all the good done until now by creatures has been done by virtue of the effects of my divine will, because there is no good without it. But as for living totally and fully in its unity, none until now, only my Queen Mamma. And this is why she drew the great prodigy of the incarnation of the Word. Had there been someone, the earth would have returned to the state of Eden. And then the one who would possess the unity of my will could neither have contained it, nor endured without speaking about it. It would have been as if the sun wanted to enclose itself inside a vase of crystal, without spreading its rays. Would it not instead crack the glass with its heat, so as to be free to spread its rays? To possess the unity of my fiat, and not to speak about it, and not to spread its rays, the beauty of its knowledges, would have been impossible for her. Her heart would crack if she did not give it vent to manifest, in part, the fullness of its light and of its goods. So, good has been done by virtue of the effects of it. You have reached the end of the Prodigies of the Blessed Virgin Mary, volumes 20 through 24. Fiat.